A woman wrote to me last week, and what she said hasn't left my mind since. She told me that 3 nights after she buried her husband of 41 years, she woke at exactly the hour he used to leave for his early shift, and the bedroom smelled, just for a moment, of his aftershave. Not a memory of it, not a longing for it. The actual scent, sharp and clean and unmistakably his, filling the room and then gone, like a door opening and closing somewhere she couldn't see. She asked me if she was losing her mind. She asked me, in a small and almost embarrassed way, if I would tell her the truth, even if the truth was hard to hear. I want to give you that same truth tonight, by this fire, because I think you've had a moment like hers, maybe more than one. Maybe you've never told a single soul. Pull your chair a little closer. What we're going to talk about tonight isn't something I can prove to you with a chart or a study, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I can tell you this: you are not alone in it. You are not imagining it out of desperation. And by the time we're finished tonight, I think the fear sitting quietly underneath these moments is going to loosen its grip on you, at least a little. Because here is what nobody tells you about grief. It isn't only sorrow. Sometimes it comes wrapped in something that feels almost like company. You've had the radio turn, unprompted, to the exact song that played at your wedding, on a day you weren't even thinking about weddings. You've felt a hand-shaped warmth settle briefly on your shoulder while you stood at the sink doing something as unremarkable as rinsing a coffee cup, and turned around already knowing, with a strange calm instead of alarm, that no one was there. You've had a cardinal land on the porch railing on the one morning of the year that would have been his birthday, sit there far longer than a bird has any reason to sit still, and look, for just a second, directly at you through the glass. You've dreamed of him so vividly, not the hazy, dissolving kind of dream, but one with weight and detail and his actual voice in it, that waking up felt less like waking and more like being pulled away from somewhere real. You've stood in a grocery store aisle you've walked 100 times, reached for the brand of coffee he always wanted instead of the one you actually drink, and caught yourself halfway through, setting it in the cart before the realization landed all over again, soft and sudden, like a wave you thought had already finished breaking. I'll tell you my own, since I promised you honesty tonight and not just theory. Some years back now, on an ordinary evening I wasn't marking as anything special, I came downstairs to find the porch light on the one I was certain, the way you're certain of very few things, that I had switched off myself before bed the night before. I stood in my own hallway, a long moment, not frightened, just still, the way you go still, around something you don't want to disturb by moving too quickly. I never found an explanation for it. I checked the switch itself twice, the bulb, even asked myself honestly whether I'd simply misremembered. I hadn't. I stopped looking for one after a while. I simply let it be what it felt like it was. None of that means anything is wrong with you. None of it means you're slipping or grieving incorrectly or losing your grip on what's real. I need you to hear that clearly before we go any further, because so many women carry these moments in complete silence, terrified that saying them out loud will make someone look at them differently. I'm not going to look at you differently. If anything, I think what you've experienced deserves to be taken seriously instead of explained away in the first 10 seconds by someone who wasn't there. But I also want to be honest with you about something else, something I think you already sense sitting underneath all of this. There's a real fear that lives right alongside these signs. The fear that you're only imagining them because you want them so badly, that grief has simply gotten clever enough to fool you, that if you say this out loud to your own children, they'll trade a worried glance with each other when they think you can't see it. That fear is exactly why so many widows go quiet about the very thing that might be holding them steady. And before I tell you what I actually believe about these signs and why I think the difference between longing and connection matters more than you'd expect, there's something harder we need to walk through first, because the comfort only holds up if it's built on something honest. If you've stayed with me this far, what comes next was written with you specifically in mind. Let's start with the part almost nobody wants to name in daylight, the quiet dread that you might be making all of this up. It's a reasonable fear, and I'm not going to talk you out of it with false certainty. Grief is a powerful, strange engine. It can produce longing so intense it borrows the shape of memory and hands it back to you, looking almost like presents. A song can simply be a song. A scent can simply be a trick of an old bottle left open in a drawer. A bird can simply be a bird, indifferent to your calendar and your losses, sitting on a railing because railings are where birds sit. I say all of this not to take anything away from you, but because I think you deserve someone who won't just tell you what feels good. You deserve someone willing to sit inside the uncertainty with you instead of paving over it. But here is the honest complication, the one that keeps this from being simple skepticism either. The sheer, repeated specificity of what widows describe, across decades and cultures and belief systems that have nothing else in common, doesn't behave like ordinary longing. Longing is diffuse. It aches in general directions, missing him at dinner, missing him in the car, missing the particular weight of his side of the bed. What you're describing to me and what that woman described in her letter is different. It's precise. It arrives at a specific hour, wearing a specific scent, playing a specific song, landing in a specific place at a specific moment that means something only to you. Ordinary longing rarely bothers to be that exact. So, why does it land heavier at certain times than others, quieter in the middle of a busy afternoon, and almost unbearable at 6 in the evening, in that particular hush, right after the news ends, and before you've decided what to do with the rest of your night? Hold on to that question. It matters more than it sounds like it should, and we'll come back to it. I'll tell you honestly, that 6 o'clock hour is the one women write to me about more than any other. It's not a coincidence that it's also, for most of you, the exact hour a marriage used to run on its own quiet current. The door opening, the coats coming off, the low murmur of two people narrating a day to each other without even thinking of it as ritual. When that current goes still, the body seems to remember it before the mind does. And I think that's precisely why the signs so often choose that hour to arrive. Not because anything mystical prefers 6 o'clock, but because that's the hour your attention is already turned, quietly and without your permission, toward him. For now, I want to give you a word for what's actually happening in these moments, because naming something honestly tends to soften the fear around it. Carl Jung, the psychiatrist whose thinking quietly underlies most of what we talk about here by the fire, had a word for this exact kind of experience. He called it synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence that carries emotional weight far beyond what pure chance would explain. A moment when the outer world and the inner world seem to line up on purpose, even though nothing about cause and effect can account for it. Jung didn't come to this idea lightly, and he didn't come to it as a mystic looking to comfort grieving patients. He came to it as a rigorous, skeptical clinician who kept noticing that his patients' inner emotional lives and the events happening around them lined up with a frequency that pure randomness couldn't fully explain. A scarab beetle tapping at the window during a session about a dream involving a scarab. A clock stopping at the precise hour of a death, in a house nowhere near the one where the death occurred. He didn't claim to know the mechanism behind it. He simply refused to dismiss the pattern just because science of his era had no box to put it in. What I want you to understand is this. Synchronicity isn't superstition dressed up in academic language, and it isn't proof of an afterlife either. I'm not qualified to promise you that, and I wouldn't insult you by pretending I am. What it is a recognized psychological pattern in which the boundary between inner longing and outer event grows thin during periods of deep emotional significance. Grief is one of the deepest emotional significances a person ever lives through. It makes sense, doesn't it, that grief would be exactly the season of life when this thinning happens most. You might be telling yourself that a strong woman, a woman who's truly made peace with her loss, wouldn't need any of this, that leaning on a song or a scent is a kind of quiet weakness, proof you haven't fully let go. I want to push back on that gently but firmly because I don't believe it's true. Needing comfort isn't the opposite of strength. It's very often what strength actually looks like once the performance of coping falls away and something more honest is allowed to take its place. The women I hear from who seem the most at peace, genuinely at peace rather than simply composed for an audience, are almost never the ones who pretended these moments didn't happen. The woman who wrote to me didn't stop at the scent of aftershave. What she told me next changed how I think about this whole subject, and I promise we'll get there in a moment. Because first, I want to walk through what I've come to recognize across years of hearing from women exactly like you as the 7 quiet signs that show up again and again in letter after letter, in comment after comment, regardless of geography or faith or how private a person someone is. The first is the sudden scent, arriving with no source: his cologne, his pipe tobacco, the particular soap he used, present for a handful of seconds, and then simply gone, leaving you standing there with your hand pressed flat against your chest. The second is the song that finds you rather than the other way around, playing on a radio you didn't choose, in a store you wandered into for no reason, at the exact moment your mind happened to land on him. The third is the number, a time on a clock, an address, an anniversary digit, appearing again and again in places that have no business repeating, until the repetition itself starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a tap on the shoulder. The fourth is the visit in sleep, not the fragile, forgettable kind of dream that dissolves within minutes of waking, but the kind with texture and weight, where his voice sounds like his actual voice, and you wake with the strange, settled sense that something real just happened rather than something merely imagined. The fifth is the creature that behaves like it has somewhere to be and chooses to be near you instead. A bird at the window, a butterfly that won't leave the porch, an animal that lingers a beat too long, holding your gaze in a way that animals, going about their ordinary animal business, generally don't. The sixth is the object out of place, a photograph found face up on a dresser where you're certain it wasn't, a piece of jewelry surfacing in a drawer you'd searched a dozen times before, a small thing behaving as though someone's hand had been there before yours. And the seventh, quieter than all the others, and somehow the one that unsettles women the most, precisely because it asks for no evidence at all, simply the feeling, the unmistakable, wordless sense of being accompanied in a room that is, by every measurable fact, empty. Not a chill, not fear, something closer to warmth, arriving uninvited and leaving you steadier than it found you. You'll be folding laundry or standing at the stove, stirring something that doesn't need stirring anymore, and the air in the room will simply feel different for a moment or two, fuller somehow. The way a house feels different the instant a second person walks into it. None of these 7 asks you to abandon your good sense. None of them asks you to announce anything to anyone before you're ready. They only ask that you stop treating your own inner life as something to be cross-examined the moment it offers you a little peace. By the end of tonight, I think something in your chest is going to feel a little lighter around at least one of those 7. Let's get there together, because there's still a harder, more honest layer underneath even this list, and I don't want to skip past it. Here's the layer almost nobody wants to sit with. Even if every one of those 7 signs is real in the deepest sense, even if I could stand here and hand you absolute proof, it wouldn't erase the ache underneath. Signs don't replace a marriage. A scent isn't a conversation. A song isn't his hand actually in yours, across a kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday. If you've been quietly hoping these moments would eventually stop the grief altogether, I want to be honest with you. Instead of comforting in a way that doesn't hold up, they won't. And I don't think they're meant to. If you're still here with me, still sitting by this fire, instead of drifting off to something easier, I want you to know that what comes next was shaped with exactly you in mind, and not some general audience I'm imagining in the abstract. What I've come to believe, after years of sitting with women who've lived this exact ache, is that these signs aren't a replacement for what you lost. They're evidence of something Jung called the transcendent function, the mind's own capacity to hold 2 seemingly opposite realities at once without collapsing under the contradiction. Grief that is genuinely, unbearably real, and connection that is also, somehow, genuinely real, existing in the very same breath, the very same afternoon, the very same cup of coffee gone cold on the counter because you got lost in thought again. You might be telling yourself that focusing on signs like these is a way of refusing to move on, that a stronger woman would simply accept the loss and stop looking for ghosts in songbirds and radio static. That isn't true, and I want to gently take that particular guilt off your shoulders right now, tonight, because it doesn't belong there. Noticing these moments isn't the opposite of healing. It's very often the shape healing actually takes once it stops looking like something you were taught to expect. There's also a complex worth naming honestly, because I don't think you're imagining this part either. A quiet, automatic guilt that surfaces the instant something good happens after loss, as though comfort itself were a kind of betrayal. You feel a flicker of peace watching that cardinal on the railing, and half a second later, guilt arrives right behind it, whispering that you shouldn't feel steadied by something so small when the loss was so large. That guilt is a complex in the truest Jungian sense, an automatic emotional reflex learned somewhere along the way, operating without your conscious permission, convincing you that peace and grief can't coexist in the same body. They can. They do. For most widows who make it through to the other side of this season with any grace at all, you might also be carrying a quieter worry, one that has nothing to do with whether the signs are real and everything to do with how the people closest to you might react if you said any of this out loud. Maybe you've already tried, once, with a son or a daughter, and watched their face do that careful, managing thing faces do when someone's deciding how worried to look. I don't think that reaction is usually about you. More often, it's what Jung called projection. The tendency to see our own unexamined fears reflected back at us through someone else's experience. Your children may not be doubting your judgment so much as protecting themselves from their own grief, which they may not have let themselves feel yet at all. That isn't a wall you have to spend your remaining years pushing against. It's simply information about where they are, not a verdict on where you are. You're allowed to keep the door open to sharing this with them one day without needing their belief as a permission slip for your own peace. Some of you will find a daughter who leans in closer instead of away, who asks a second question instead of changing the subject. Others of you won't, not for a long while yet, and that will be its own kind of quiet grief sitting alongside this one. Either way, you don't need a witness for something to be real to you. The woman who wrote to me, the one whose bedroom filled briefly with the scent of aftershave 3 nights after the funeral, went on to describe the moment that actually changed how I understand all of this. She said that a full year later, on a morning she'd nearly forgotten the anniversary was even approaching, she found his reading glasses sitting neatly folded on the kitchen table, in the exact spot where he used to leave them every single morning of their marriage, a table she had wiped down herself the night before, completely bare. She had looked everywhere for those glasses 18 months earlier and never found them. She has no explanation. She isn't asking for one anymore. What she told me was simpler than that. She said the fear finally left her that morning, replaced by something she could only describe as being walked alongside rather than left behind. I think that's really what these 7 signs are for. Not proof, in the way a courtroom would demand it. Companionship, in the only form grief allows love to keep taking after death, has closed every ordinary door. This isn't the end of the connection you shared. In the language we keep coming back to here by the fire, it may well be the beginning of your individuation, the slow, unhurried process of becoming even more fully yourself in the second half of life, carrying what you loved forward instead of setting it down at the door behind you. Something is already shifting for you, even in these few minutes we've spent together tonight. I can feel it in the quality of the quiet on your end of this fire. I want you to picture, just for a moment, an ordinary evening a few weeks from now. You're moving through your kitchen the way you always do, and something small happens. A song, a scent, a bird at the window, the 7th sign, the wordless feeling of being accompanied in an empty room. And instead of the old fear rising up first, instead of the flinch and the second guessing and the silent argument with yourself about whether you're allowed to trust it, something else arrives in its place, a kind of steadiness, a small, private smile you don't feel the need to explain to anyone. You don't need the moment to be provable anymore. You only need it to be yours, held the way you'd hold a warm cup on a cold night, gratefully and without apology. The house around you is the same house, but something in how you stand inside it has changed, and it keeps changing, gently, every time you let yourself notice. Picture, too, the version of you a little further out a year from tonight, perhaps, sitting somewhere warm with someone you love, telling this story out loud without the old flinch in your voice. Not because the ache is gone. It won't be, not entirely, and I wouldn't lie to you and promise it will. But because you'll have stopped treating your own experience as something shameful to manage and started treating it as something worth simply having lived. Here's what I want you to actually do, starting tonight, not someday. The next time one of these 7 signs arrives, the scent, the song, the number, the dream, the creature at the window, the object out of place, or simply the feeling, I want you to pause exactly where you are and say his name out loud, softly, just once. Not to summon anything, simply to acknowledge it, the way you'd acknowledge a friend who'd walked quietly into the room. Let yourself receive it instead of immediately interrogating it. You can be skeptical again 5 minutes later if you need to be. But give yourself that one unguarded moment first. If this is your story too, I would love to know which of the 7 signs has found you and which one are you still quietly waiting for. Tell me honestly in the comments tonight. I read every single one. And if you're watching this with a cup of tea going cold beside you, the way so many of you tell me you do, let me know where you're watching from tonight. It matters more to me than you'd probably guess, hearing exactly where all of you are sitting while we talk like this. You are so far from the only one who has felt this and stayed quiet about it out of fear. Tell me I'm not alone in believing these moments deserve to be taken seriously. And let's remind each other, together, in the comments. What's one thing tonight that shifted, even slightly, in how you think about the signs you've already received? Before we close tonight, let me hold what we've talked about in my own 2 hands for a moment, the way I'd hold it if you were sitting right here across from me instead of on the other side of a screen. Grief and connection are not opposites fighting for the same space in your chest. They are both true at once, the way firelight and shadow share the same room without one erasing the other. The scent, the song, the bird, the glasses on the table, whatever form it's taken for you, it was never asking you to prove anything to anyone. It was only ever asking you to notice. Come back and sit with me again tomorrow night. There's more of this I want to share with you, and I'll be right here by the fire, waiting the way I always am. You are not imagining this. You are not losing your mind. And whatever quiet sign found its way to you, on whatever ordinary afternoon it arrived, you were exactly where you needed to be to receive it. Whatever you decide to call what happened to you a coincidence, a comfort your own mind built to carry you through, or something more than either of those, I don't think it much matters which word you choose. What matters is that you stop apologizing for the peace it gave you, even for a moment, even if you can't explain it to a single other person. You carried a marriage for decades. You're allowed to let it keep carrying you back in small and unprovable ways for however long you need it to. Wherever you are tonight, however that fire in your own home is burning or not burning, I'm glad you sat here with me. Rest well. I'll be right here again tomorrow. Same fire, same chair, waiting for you.